Welcome to the Undefined Leader, where we reimagine leadership, redefine work, and get curious. Today, we're getting curious about feedback. Derek and I are coaches and trainers, and something we hear a lot from leaders is how they shy away from giving feedback to their team. So Derek, before we dive into feedback and how to actually give and receive feedback, give us a little education on what are some different types of common feedbacks that are being taught right now.
Yeah, Alex, I'm looking forward to this conversation too. I really like this topic, and feedback has been something of a personal journey for me where, a couple of years ago, I intentionally tried to get better at feedback because I knew I was bad at it and it was something I wanted to improve at. So, as we talk about like labels and terms, there's positive feedback, there's negative feedback, there's constructive criticism, which I think is kind of like a funny way of labeling constructive criticism. There's just criticism, feedback versus criticism. It's sometimes feedback is criticism. And what is the difference between there? There's the opposite of constructive feedback, constructive criticism, which is called destructive criticism, which I guess there's a time and place to be destructive with your feedback and your criticism. I don't know how effective that is. And then on top of like all those labels and terms, there's just kind of like strategies. Something like the feedback sandwich has long been taught as a strategy. Have you heard about the old feedback sandwich, Alex?
Yes, I have mainly, and I hate it. I'm just putting it out there. I do not like the feedback sandwich. I think it's because it's taught so much. To this day, it's still being taught. And when someone's receiving feedback, I almost assume that they're using the feedback sandwich. So I'm not taking any of the positive stuff they're saying seriously. And I'm like, I'm just waiting for the but. Just get to the point and tell me where it is. And it seems so ingenuine and not authentic that I do not like the feedback sandwich. Do you?
I'm a huge fan of hating on it. Tricked you there.
I was like, what?
I wanted to trick you there. No, I love to hate the feedback sandwich. And right, just to be clear what we're talking about, it's this idea of there's like something you really want to say, but you realize it's kind of like critical or negative. So the thought is, well, let me say something nice or positive. Then I'll say what I want to say. And then I'll finish with, so Alex, like maybe I want to give you, feedback that you can't be late anymore. Right. So I'm like, Alex, it's so nice to see you today. I feel like we haven't seen each other in a while and I always enjoy talking. By the way, I noticed you're late. You can't be late, but I really like your shoes today, and yeah, to me, it's kind of like silly, and I understand why it came up and why it was taught and the place that it served. But I agree. It's just so fake. And so when I hear someone say that positive, I'm like, okay, here it comes. I'm just waiting for the but for it to follow versus I just wish that, feedback would just be authentic and transparent. And if you have something to say, just say it. You don't need to sandwich it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So today we're really going to talk about meaningful feedback. And I guess meaningful feedback kind of depends on what we think meaningful is. You gave us a few different terms. What do you think is meaningful feedback? And how does it differ from the other terms that you just gave?
Well, for it to be meaningful, then it serves a purpose, right? Like there's a point to it and it's helpful. Like if I'm the person receiving meaningful feedback, I would think like, okay, like I can use this. I can take it and there's, it's for my own benefit. Is it a lot of times feedback just on its own? Like, okay, someone says something to you as like a piece of feedback and you're like, oh, okay. And, I don't know what to do with it, or I don't know what to think about this versus I think in my mind, for it to be meaningful, I sort of know what I should do with that feedback when I receive it.
It's actually helpful. You're bettering yourself, your team. You're walking away from that conversation, having a game plan to improve in some way. I think when we coach a lot of leaders, what we realize the deep down concern and fear around giving feedback is criticism. I think a lot of people think criticism and feedback is the same thing. I just looked up the definition of criticism. Criticism is the expression of disapproval of someone or something. So that is directly based off of something that I'm disapproving, something I don't like. versus feedback isn't a disapproval. It's more of a sharing your thoughts in order to improve on something. Would you agree on those two differences between criticism and feedback?
Yeah, I think so. And I think maybe kind of similar to how I've heard it say is like criticism is a focus on what we don't want, and feedback is a little bit more of a focus on what we do want. And so like I think like sometimes feedback needs to have a little bit of the negative, potentially in there, but I think it's where the focus from it is. Like criticism usually starts with don't or stop or things like that versus talking about what we want to see instead.
Mm-hmm. And as leaders, sometimes we might shy away from giving feedback, criticism. It might feel like conflict just based off of past experiences that we've had. But studies show that 80% of employees who received meaningful feedback in the past week felt more engaged with their jobs. Why do you
Mm.
think that is?
Well, I I guess for me, like if I'm looking through my lens, if you're giving me meaningful feedback, I feel like you care about me, and I feel like you're invested in me and you're interested in me and you care about me and you want me to do well. So I'm going to be more engaged. I'm going to want to reciprocate on that for a person who's giving me that type of meaningful feedback. I think there's a return of, well, okay, I'm gonna respond to that and feel more engaged because you care about me. Was that what you're thinking?
Yeah, it's actually an act of kindness, right? Giving feedback to employees is actually an act of kindness. I know that's something that's really important to you. Why do you think feedback might be considered as kindness?
Yeah, and there was a big study that I was looking about this kind of like for 2025 and looking back in 2024, and I think there's an absence of kindness in a lot of communication, just in not just in work related, just in general, that people tend to empathy, kindness are kind of wrapped up a little bit and kind of like forget that piece of the communication. And in this study, only 56% of employees feel like their leaders are benevolent. And essentially that benevolence is kindness and you care for me and that you're well-meaning. Even like a base level thing of that you're being well-meaning in giving this feedback versus I think the opposite of that would be I think you're only giving me this feedback for our company's sake, for like profit, revenue, things like that. And it's not about me personally. And so I think like that kindness piece of it is I want you to be the best that you can. I want you to reach your potential. I'm going to tell you this to be kind to you, to help you do this. And again, I just think like it doesn't need to be in a sandwich. It doesn't need to be overly positive. It doesn't need to be, a whole other thing for me to get into is like the toxic positivity, type of thing. It meaningful is kind. It's clear. And it's like, oh, you are sharing that with me for me and you care about me and not just everything else going on.
And result of all of that is companies and teams that give regular, meaningful feedback end up reducing their employee retention by 15%. That was it. Like just the act of giving meaningful, regular feedback reduced retention by 15%. So
Yeah.
there's that type of loyalty. And we spoke in a different episode about why employees leave. And part of that is because they don't feel cared by their company and by their supervisor. So one of the ways that you can actually care for your team is by giving meaningful feedback.
When it's a skill, like I've learned that the hard way that it is a skill. And if you want to get better at feedback, you have to be intentional. You have to practice it. You have to try different strategies. And it kind of goes against, sometimes I think what I hear from leaders is, well, that person, they're not open to feedback or they don't take feedback well. And I think when I hear that now, it's like, well, with the way that you're giving it, yeah, but have you tried a different approach? Have you tried to develop that skill? Have you tried a different strategy? So maybe it's that way that you're doing it is what they're not open to. Not necessarily, who doesn't want meaningful feedback? I would just struggle to accept that someone has an employee that doesn't want feedback. I think that goes against human nature. They just don't want that type of feedback.
All right, let's dive into how to actually give meaningful feedback then. So, Derek, you were using the example of being late to work multiple times in a row. I think before you actually even give the employee feedback, you really need to do some reflection by yourself as a leader. So first think about Did I clearly communicate expectations to this employee before? Have I trained this employee on this before? Do I know that we're aligned and on the same page about this specific thing? A lot of the times you might realize you thought it's common knowledge and you just think that, oh, well, everyone should be doing this, but you never actually communicated it. So you're not even aligned on what the expectations are. So I think that's such an important part of preparing to get feedback. The other part is checking your emotions. Feedback should not be this emotional conversation. It shouldn't necessarily be something personal. It should be based on the situation, and it's more of a conversation than an attack and criticism. So I think it's also important to reflect and make sure that you are calm before you go into giving feedback. Because there are times when you're, as a leader, as a manager, as an owner, you're just frustrated. You have so many fires going on, and this might have happened a few times. And in your mind, you build up the situation of, well, Derek's lazy and he always shows up late and he doesn't work as hard as I do. And now you're really riled up going into that conversation. So it's so important to just do some reflection and make sure you're showing up the right way. Because earlier we talked about the entire purpose of giving feedback is actually kindness, and it's for improvement. So am I going into it being curious and kind and caring? And is the purpose of the conversation actually to improve? Is there anything else, Derek, that you would think of how a leader could prep for the conversation?
Something I'm curious about, because Alex, I know you're really good at giving feedback. I think you're one of the best people that I've received feedback from. So I know you're really skilled at it. And I've heard that one of the components of effective feedback is the timeliness of it. And you were kind of saying too, like, if you personally are kind of caught up in it, immediate might not be the smartest move. But I also know that it seems like there's maybe almost like a timer, and the further you get away from the moment that you want to give feedback about, like the less effective it can get as well. So how do you kind of balance this idea of timeliness with your feedback?
Timeliness is so important. It needs to be timely and it needs to be regular. So it should be a part of the day-to-day conversations that you're having. If you're able to have that conversation immediately, if you know that you're not in an emotional state and you're able to have that conversation immediately, have it immediately. If you realize you need to take yourself out of the situation and decompress a little bit before the conversation, schedule it as soon as possible. Same day is ideal. Definitely, absolutely, same week. You should not be bringing up something like, hey, Derek, remember when you did X, Y, and Z a month ago? That's not very effective feedback. So it has to be timely. So I think the sooner is better.
Yeah.
But also know your situation. Like, that if the employee at that moment is maybe frazzled by something, is a very emotional situation, and you need to both just take a step back before you have a good conversation, that's okay as well.
You were saying, as the leader going to give the feedback, you need to show up well, right? You need to, think about how you're showing up. I think there's another component of this too, of helping the person that you're going to give the feedback to show up as well as they can as well. And this is kind of another pet peeve of mine, of if someone wants to give me feedback, of sending me like a text or a Slack that's like, hey, can we talk?
So scary.
Yeah, I do not like receiving them. And the funny thing too about it is, in like the history of receiving those type of messages, it's usually like nothing. It's usually just like not a big deal, but it's that sense of like doom and dread and fear and anxiety that I know that I'm not showing up to that phone call or to that Zoom meeting or whatever at my best, about to hear feedback, if that's how it's been set up. So what kind of tips do you have of helping that person show up as best as they can to a scenario where you want to give feedback?
I think it's about the culture that you build within the company too. Like, feedback should be a part of the culture. So it's something that's expected, and it's not something that's a one-off of, oh no, I'm in trouble because I just got some feedback. So I think it should be intertwined in your daily conversations, so much so that you can even schedule debrief sessions. So if you're looking at someone's performance on your team, just always have a debrief right after that. So then you can give immediate feedback about that person's performance right after that. There's a structure for it. We're calling it a debrief session. You know that I'm going to give you feedback. It's something that's structured and we know it's coming up. But then there's situations where some bad thing might have happened, like you keep showing up late and now I'm supposed to give you feedback around that. And I'm not really sure the best way to go about it, but I would assume give a little bit of context. Give that person a little bit of context of, hey, Derek, I know you have a busy day, but I do want to talk to you a little bit about some expectations and we may not have been aligned. Don't worry about it. Just want to have some conversations around that with you. Do you have 10 minutes today?
Yeah, I like that. I think you're talking about the culture. Is it a culture of feedback, or is it a culture that views feedback as criticism, our negativity? Like we only say things to each other when something's bad, versus that regular, consistent. And because we're doing it regular, consistent, the majority of it is positive. The majority of it is coaching, right? Is it a coaching type of thing? And this, I think, just like a little culture test. And when I'm coaching other leaders, I'll kind of ask them this question to kind of test their culture a little bit. And it's, okay, if you were to send an email right now to your team that says like, hey, all hands meeting on Friday, are they going to immediately assume good news, or are they going to assume bad news? Or if you were to send a message to someone right now, hey, let's have a one-on-one next week, are they going to be happy and excited and looking forward to that? Or are they going to be stressed out and anxious about that? And I think that speaks to what you're talking about, is what is the norm? What is the typical thing? And is feedback usually given because something went wrong? Or is feedback something that just happens all the time? Meaning that most of the time it's going to be positive if it's something that's happening all the time.
I like that test. I'm going to add a third portion to that test.
Yeah.
Of asking the leader, when's the last time you received feedback
Oh, that's
from your
good.
team? Because a lot of the times we think feedback is top down. But if you have a strong culture of giving feedback, your team should be also giving you feedback regularly. So when's the last time you got feedback from your team?
That's really good, because I'm glad you said that, because I do think that feedback should be a conversation, right? It should be a two-way avenue. It shouldn't just be a one-way directional type of thing. There is, and like the corporate buzzword type of thing, there's this whole thing that I didn't include in the beginning definition, but this idea of 360 feedback, right? Where it's, and I don't always give the best attitude towards corporate, buzzwords, but I get the idea that feedback should happen around you. So, from people that you report to, from the people that report to you, and to the people that are maybe just like your colleagues. Like if you're a director of one division, that you could be able to give feedback to the director. It's equal from like a hierarchy standpoint, but feedback goes laterally as it goes up and as it goes down. So I do like that idea of everyone feeling that it's okay to give feedback to everyone.
So we're saying so far, for meaningful feedback, it should be regular. It should be timely. Those are the two things we really looked at so far. I think the other side of it too is it should be very specific and direct or transparent. Like we were talking about the sandwich, it shouldn't be beating around the bush. I'm going to say all these things just so you feel good. But what I really want to say is this thing is I think you have to show up with curiosity and empathy, ask questions, and be very direct and specific about the situation, not you as a person. We should never be blaming, like, Derek, you as a person are always late and you're never timely. Like, that shouldn't be pointing fingers, but it's more about very specific what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
And there
And
shouldn't be a question around that as well. Go ahead.
I think that's like where the idea of the constructive feedback or the constructive criticism comes in, and that it's trying to remove judgment with a focus on, again, we go back to the late, employee type of thing. But like Alex, if you're the late employee, it's less about the act of being late and more about like what that does and why we can't be late. Like more about like why you need to be on time versus like a judgment on the act of being late. So I kind of get that in that idea. But again, though, I don't think that's fitting the full idea of it being meaningful, because you probably know that you're late if you're being late, and you probably also know, a bit of like why you're not supposed to. So having that pointed out to you and things like that, like, again, it might be missing the meaningful piece of it, which is kind of like maybe helping you, like you said, being curious to maybe finding out, well, maybe the schedule's just bad, or maybe the work arrangements are just bad. And here we are retreading this topic, and maybe we should be talking about something else. Because maybe I don't know that, you have kids to pick up in the morning, or a sick family member, or things like that. And it's not meaningful to you because you know that we're not even talking about the real issue at hand. And so you just say, okay, yeah, whatever, I'm sorry. And we both separate, but nothing meaningful. And trust didn't grow from that. You actually lost trust in me as a leader, maybe that because I wasn't being kind, and I wasn't being curious, and I wasn't being empathetic to your situation.
And the situation's not going to resolve because of that too. If I just say, okay, Derek, you've been late, and show up on time tomorrow, that doesn't solve anything. You probably knew you should be on time anyway. That's a big reason why when I'm giving feedback, the very first thing I do is ask a question. Like, be very clear of the context of what we're about to talk about and ask a question. So in this example, I might ask you, hey, Derek, I've noticed for the last 3 days, you're pretty late to work. We start at 10 a.m. and you've been showing up around 11. Is everything okay? What's going on? Like, that is my curious and empathetic mind of letting you, first I'm telling you, hey, this was the expectation. This is the situation of what's happening. And I'm giving you a chance to communicate what's going on in your life. Because at that point you might say, my wife is really sick and I've been having to take care of my kids. Okay, well, now we can have a conversation around how do we solve that going forward? How do we make sure it's a situation that works for you as well as works for the company and the team? So you always have to give that context and be very specific. Like I said, we usually start at 10 a.m. and you've been showing up at 11. What's going on? Are you okay? And so listen. And then from there, then it could go into either coaching mode, or now let's try to find a solution to improve the situation together. And then follow-up is so important after that too. So once you have that conversation, hopefully you walk away with actionable solution that we both agree on. It can't be the leader saying, here's what we're going to do next. It has to be a conversation and we both agree on what the next steps are. And then there should be a follow-up where then we come back and revisit and say, hey, looks like the new schedule's working. Do you think it's working still for you and your life situation happening right now? All right, great. And so there should be a follow-up where the employee also knows if they're now improved, or do we need more support in order to improve as well. That's kind of how I go about feedback.
Yeah, that to me, I think, is meaningful. When I was kind of going through my own journey of getting better at feedback and just trying to improve my communication skills as a leader, just very specifically, there's a book, and for anyone watching this on video, they can see it. And if they're just listening to this, but it's Messages is the book. It's by Dr. Matthew McKay. And it is one of the best books that I've ever read as like a leadership skill handbook of sorts. And there was a concept in there that was a game changer for me in giving feedback. And he goes through this whole idea of whole messaging. And basically, as humans, we have the ability to express ourselves kind of in 4 ways. We can express what we observe, what we think, what we feel, and what we want or need. And the idea behind a complete message to someone, a whole message, is that we touch on all 4. And so it's, you get, if I'm the one delivering feedback and I'm able to reference all 4 of those and express myself all 4 ways, you don't have any guesswork left, kind of from my perspective on things. And where I think we run into trouble is what the book calls, when we do contaminated messaging, where we mix up the methods of expression and we express ourselves one way, but we really mean another way. An example might be is like, let's say I come home and I'd asked somebody to like do the dishes, and the dirty dishes are still in the sink. What I want is for the dishes to be done, but the way that I might express myself is, I see that dishes are still in the sink. That's a very contaminated message, because someone could be like, yes, I see them there too. And versus like, but I think sometimes we fear just being direct and expressing that we wanted the dishes to be clean. And so we hide them in other type of expressions. And then this is where I think we like sugarcoat things, or like you said, beat around the bush, because we're trying to like hide our expression inside of other expressions. So even the late example, right? I see you were late. Okay. What I think what the person means is I don't want you to be late, or here's how you being late makes me feel. But we contaminated it. We mixed up, and that's on us for the person to not respond well to that because I didn't express myself correctly.
Can you give me an example of a whole message and
Yeah.
how you'd use it in this example?
Yeah. So, if we need to hit all four of the modes of expressing us. So for the example, of someone being late, right? It could be, yes, I observed that you were late, or that's the specific thing that you were talking about as well. Maybe I observed that you were late here, here, and here. Then the next would be to observe what we think. It makes me maybe think that maybe I wasn't clear with, expectations, or there was some type of miscommunication about, procedures for start time. And then that makes me feel, and I could go either way with this. I could make it personal. And it makes me feel like I didn't do a good job, or maybe we're past that point and it makes, I might be more direct of, Alex, that makes me feel like, you're not thinking about, we have a lot of customers who want to call us at that time, or it makes, but this is just what I'm feeling. And then the fourth mode is expressing what we want or need. So if we're in more of a curious mode, maybe it's Alex, and what I want is just to hear from you. Is the schedule bad, or is there something that I'm not giving you that you need? Or again, it could be more directive of, and Alex, what I need is for you to be here on time because of XYZ reasons. But now there shouldn't be a lack of clarity in what I'm seeing, what I'm thinking, how that makes me feel, and what I want from you or what I need from you.
It's also not blaming, pointing fingers, bringing in all these different situations. It's very focused on your experience about this situation. It's very focused on, there's no right or wrong. It's how you see, feel, observe. That's how you're feeling in that situation. And so now it's opening up that conversation also for that person to share how they see, feel, experience, and what they may need as well.
Yeah. I found it really helpful because I sort of felt like when I was learning to get better at this, I needed more of a template to operate through. Like I philosophically understand, all the things that we've been talking about, but what I felt like I was lacking was a clear template that I could kind of operate in. And so again, when I'm mindful and when I'm, kind of able to tap into this, I've found it's been a game changer for me to organize my thoughts and to kind of get over, some fears that I'm going to be taken the wrong way, or I'm going to be coming across as mean, or things that I don't mean. So in some ways it's a bit selfish because it's helping me feel good about giving the feedback, but the feedback that I get in return is that it's been appreciated, that I kind of go the extra steps to include all the info in the feedback that I'm giving.
So far we talked a lot about how to give the feedback, what might be meaningful. What do you think is almost like a checkpoint for a leader to be able to, after they give feedback, to be able to question, is that conversation, was that meaningful feedback? Was that good? Do I need to improve at giving feedback? What are some things you think a leader could ask themselves after the feedback to know if it was meaningful or not?
I think that's a great question. Did the person, as like a reflection, did the person that you were giving feedback to ask you any questions? Or was it just, okay. And was it just a one-sided thing? If I didn't get any questions back, I think I should be concerned. What would be one from you?
I think for me, I need to walk away being able to answer, do I think this person is aware of what we just spoke about, what needs to be improved? Like, are they now aware? Because maybe they didn't know that they were late. Maybe they didn't know that they weren't performing well. So now after the conversation, are they now aware? Was it clear to me that they communicated to me that they're aware? Is it clear to me that they have a desire to improve after that feedback? So now they're aware. Do they want to actually improve in that area? Because also you can give really good, meaningful feedback and that person may not care about that, doesn't want to improve on that. And so is it actually meaningful then? And then the third part for me is also, do I have a very clear action step to help this person improve in it? And did we both agree on those steps? Did we both agree on how this person could be supported in order to improve?
I like that. Yeah, a follow through plan, like leading with a clear idea of what is this going to look like? What is the next step? What, like you said, like the expectation of, here's just what I want. Again, the whole messaging, here's what I want to see after this meeting. That might be some of the clarity as well. So I know what you want as the leader, or as the leader, I need to be clear that I know what I even want afterwards, versus just being so caught up in the moment of saying like, don't do this or stop doing this. So what do we want instead to replace that behavior?
Can you think of a time that you had to give someone really, really difficult feedback, or the situation might be really difficult for you?
For running my own business, for about 9 or 10 years, and having a lot of employees and just customers and things like that, I had so many conversations that I never, ever, ever expected that I would have in my life. So this is a huge weakness of mine. I don't thrive with it. I don't think I'm great at it. That's why I wanted to improve on it. So even just some of like the more mundane things of like, you can't wear that, or like that's in my mind. That's like what I want to say, or like, why would you say that to a customer? Like that's what I'm thinking. I've had to have a lot of those like corrective feedbacks, and I stress so much about it and worried so much about it. So this has been something too where I wish I could go back in time with what I know now too and handle those better as well, because I didn't always get great reactions from those conversations.
Well, I think you give really good feedback now. So sounds like whole messaging helped you a lot.
It's a game changer for me. For me personally, understanding the idea of whole messaging has been a complete game changer.
I will say with my team, the moment I was really proud of, it's such a small thing, but we had a brand new employee, and this employee showed up wearing something very unprofessional, and I didn't have to deal with it. I didn't even know it was happening, but another teammate felt comfortable enough to give the new employee feedback and support them and help them and clear expectations around it. And as a supervisor, I never even had to jump into this moment. And I was so proud because it showed me that we created a culture of feedback, where feedback isn't just from the leader to the team members, but it is team members, each other are comfortable enough to give each other feedback, even if it's a really uncomfortable subject as well. So I was pretty proud of that moment.
Yeah, that's nice. So again, that's like we were talking about at the beginning. Ultimately, all of this work is to create that culture, and as the leader too, modeling. So if you model the idea, I think that you've talked about of giving timely feedback, giving specific, giving relevant, giving meaningful, you're modeling it by giving that type of feedback. And this is maybe, I know when you kind of like wrap this up, but I think this is an interesting thing too, of you're modeling it in like a one-on-one and as you're giving feedback, but when is it ever appropriate to maybe give feedback in a group setting so that other people in the team can see you modeling that type of behavior? Because a lot of times, I think what we've been talking about is more conducive to a private type of conversation. But I do think there is a time and place for just in front of everybody, giving somebody specifically like one person feedback so that everyone else can see and it reinforces that culture. Have you been in that position before?
Yeah, how I went about it though is I put myself in the position to be given feedback in a group setting. So I want to model it as well of I ask in a group setting for feedback about something specific about maybe my leadership or the organization or the team or the company, the direction we're going. And so because I want to show them that it's safe and it's okay to give someone feedback. So if they start feeling comfortable giving me feedback, then it kind of gets rid of a lot of the walls that we built to protect ourselves of saying, oh, it's actually safe to give feedback, and they're watching how I receive the feedback. So now I'm also modeling how we receive feedback in a group setting as well in our company. And so I think that's really important. Before I started giving feedback in a group setting to create that safety around it and trust around it, I put some other structures in place. So for example, we have debriefing sessions where it's very specific that we watch someone in action and their job. And it could be a group of us, and then we come in and then we give each other feedback on what we just watched. So it might say, hey, what do we like about it? Where do you think this person can improve on it? So it's a structured way of everyone being able to give feedback about something that's specific, but it's also because it's not about that person, but it's about the product. It's about the process. It's about growing. And it's not even about growing just for that person. It's everyone that's watching and everyone that's around that situation should be learning and growing because of it too. So like if someone's late, I wouldn't have that conversation in a group setting because it
Doesn't benefit the group.
doesn't benefit the group. So you have to decide what actually benefits the group and then also demonstrate how to receive and give feedback at the same time. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And I guess, if no one else is being late, it really doesn't benefit the group because no one else has an issue with that. But if lateness is a thing that's been kind of like happening across the team, again, but then now you run into the danger of like singling out one person there. So I do think that is a tough line there of kind of knowing when to address something like that in front of the group. I think that's a good idea though. Like, is there any benefit to the rest of the group from this conversation? Or if only one person benefits from it, yeah, then just have the conversation with that one person.
I mean, you're right, because being late, if it wasn't just a one person thing and majority of the group is also going through it, then I might have that same very similar conversation of, hey guys, as a team, we've been starting 45 minutes late and here's the impact that it's made. How do we get better as a team in this? So again, it's not about saying this person is late and that's why we're getting late, but it's more of how do we win and grow and be better and improve as a team.
Yeah, just kind of wrap this up in a big study that I looked at during like the Great Resignation and why people quit. Alex, both of you and I have actually given speeches and discussions on this of like why good employees quit. And it's that whole idea of like good employees, like high performing employees will at least think about quitting, if not eventually quit based on kind of what's allowed and tolerated from other people, that overall like lack of accountability inside of the group and across the team. So I think, being able to navigate feedback in such a meaningful and kind and clear way that everyone sees that it's actively happening, I think is a strength of a leader, but it's tough. This is a tough one to manage correctly.
You know what I would love our listeners to do after this podcast?
Go
give
give
us
somebody
feedback. No, give us feedback about this episode. Yeah, practice whole messaging, practice being curious and empathetic, and give us feedback.
Yeah, reach us on Instagram, send us a message, give us some feedback. That's great. Yeah, that's a good action item to happen from it. Alex, I feel like we've covered the topic of meaningful feedback. I enjoyed this one.
I did too. I think it's such an important skill to have as leaders. So hope you guys are able to take some stuff that you learned today with feedback and you're able to implement it right away and give us feedback too. I'm excited to see what kind of feedback we get, Derek.
Me too.